Hello everyone and welcome to Avantika Designeering Series or ADS as we like to call it. Every week on Wednesday, we feature design and technology leaders who share their professional journey, their thoughts on their domain of work, and designeering where the world of design and engineering meet. Make sure you follow us on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And with that, let's continue with your show.
The base objective for any designer is to design a meaningful human experience. It goes beyond just crafting a product. A perfect combination of empathy and emotion results in a beautiful experience that is very human and apt in a use case. Such an experience will eventually foster irrational loyalty in users, resulting in many loyal customers. There are many ways to go about it, but a key component is understanding the human values, which will lead to the creation of high customer value. To know more about this theme, in this episode, we interact with Tim Kobe, founder and CEO of 8 Inc. With over 3 decades of experience as a design leader, he has worked with companies like Apple, Tesla, Virgin Atlantic Airways, and many more leading brands. And that's why, on our journey of discovering designeering, we talked to him about written on experiences. Hello, Mr. Kobe. Welcome to Avantika Designeering Podcast Series. It's an honor to host you on our show today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Super. So, as our icebreaker question to you, Mr. Kobe, you have worked with some of the most iconic brands in the world. Which of these associations has been the most meaningful experiences for you?
Well, we've been very fortunate, I would say, to work with some amazing people. A big part of what is satisfying in this business is to be able to collaborate with great companies, but more importantly, great individuals. And it's hard not to say that the most meaningful experience was the work with Apple and working directly with Steve Jobs. So that has been something that I would say fits at the top of the most meaningful. But we've also been fortunate to work with Virgin and to work with Tesla and some of the other companies that are very highly regarded. But if we're looking for the most meaningful, I have to say 12 years every week with Steve Jobs was a very meaningful, unique experience.
Indeed, and I'm sure that there are so many stories that we've read about your association with him, so many multiple interviews out there. It is truly inspiring for all of us in the world of design to hear, to read about your association with all of these organizations and your work. It's absolutely inspiring. So, Mr. Kobe, you graduated in science, environmental design, and you are known as an architect and now a successful business leader. How do you balance these different roles and mindsets? How do you shift the gears between, what you've studied, what you are good at, and what you do professionally?
Well, I guess balancing them, at least in my mind, is not so difficult because we don't really look at things, by category. And obviously, I graduated from environmental design at Art Center College in Pasadena. The degree there gives us a background in kind of a diverse range of things, which includes architecture, industrial design, communications, etc. But to balance those skills that were developed from the education side with really questioning why do you design things and understanding what the purpose of design really is. When you get down to that, it all comes back to the same thing. And I think even successful businesses, it comes back to the same thing, which are, what are the outcomes you're looking to achieve for people, and what is the strategy that you're going to employ to deliver those outcomes, and then what are the tactics that support the strategy to deliver the outcomes. So it kind of ladders back in each case, always back to what it does for people. And I think that's fundamentally the touchstone that's a common thread.
Wow, that's an interesting outlook in terms of how do you connect the dots actually out there. In fact, Mr. Kobe, you are an inspiration to all the designers out there. Can you take us through your journey of the last 3 decades of 8 Inc. and contributing to building multiple products and brands out there globally?
Sure. I guess, when if you look at the journey, we didn't start out knowing what we know today, obviously. And I think to a large degree, we followed some core things that led us to where we are today. And I think, particularly if you're looking at students or new companies who are starting, or anyone in the design profession, it goes back to trying to define what you think you have the greatest strengths an individual. What are your greatest strengths? Define those, and if you don't yet know what they are, exploring the things that come from point of view of what passion you have that's going to drive it. So I would say that we started out our business. I had worked for a couple of different companies after graduating from school, but we started our business, and each project that we received was different from the previous one. And if we were to build a business, let's say in hospitality design, it would have been very difficult, because we might do one hospitality design project, and the next one that we would do would be retail, and then the next one would be an experience center, and it would be different each time. So what was fortunate was that we recognized at a certain point that it's not about the category, or it's not about the discipline per se. That's the way we think about it when we're studying a particular path of education. But ultimately, when you come out of that, the common thread becomes this idea of um, what what is the experience that you're creating for people? What are the things that they're getting from that? And so we started to kind of focus more and more on understanding people, understanding behavior, some psychology, some biology, and none of these things were being taught in our design program. But the considerations that we brought to the design had to be rooted to a certain degree in that level of thinking. And when we were able to do that, we found that we would have much greater success. And so it was sort of discipline agnostic, that we didn't necessarily try, nor could we have executed everything in one category and grown our business. But the common category was really this idea of designing human experience. What does it mean to design? What does it mean to be human and look at it from a perspective of engaging people in a relationship? And the third is how to define an experience that is meaningful, differentiated, and have emotional connections to people.
Interesting. And I'm sure that that's how you bring all these stakeholders together and make a meaningful impact and experiences for the customers out there. And while we speak on experiences, your new book reflects the fundamental belief that design is integral to everything that we do, that all human existence has been a result of progression of successful design outcomes. My question to you, Mr. Kobe, is can you elaborate on this thought and also share relevant examples aligned to this?
Sure. I think when we look at design, and I appreciate the mention of the book. We talk about return on experience. It means that the things uh, that people remember, the things that they connect to emotionally, are typically through the experience they have with it, and whether that's relationships with people, or whether that's experience with a product, or whether that's a piece of great architecture. Fundamentally, it comes back to the experience that you have with it. And when I was in high school, I had a professor who after we were finished drawing our assignments of a new building, would tell us that, or would ask the question, now, do you think you understand architecture? And everyone, of course, nodded that they thought they understood. And then he went on to explain that we didn't have a clue what architecture was. All we could do is document three-dimensional space, but that in three-dimensional space, what architecture is about creating an experience. And so I think he's set at a very early age this foundation of the way you experience great architecture or a great product or a great brand relationship, is by the different touch points that you have with that. And so, the examples are numerous in terms of the commercial side of things that we've done. But I think ultimately, that belief in defining human progress, the design defines progress. We tend to adopt the things that work, that have meaning, and we tend to let go of the things that don't. And we've done that, as long as human beings have been around. And so when you think of design, it's all part of this narrative. And I think that's ultimately getting back to a focus on the right things in order to ensure that the design you're doing has merit and value.
Interesting. In fact, Mr. Kobe, I have heard about the concept of return on customer, but in the book, you talk about a new matrix of measuring business success, which is return on experience. Can you elaborate on what do you mean by return on experience and how are these two philosophies different from each other?
Well, it's not that if you're talking about the experience that you're disregarding the customer. In fact, the customer is at the center of that experience. It's the thing that you're creating, how you interact with a device, how you interact with a space. Those things are rooted in the people who ultimately use and adopt what you're creating. And so the experience you have with it is the way that we found to be the best way to understand the things that have the most traction with people. And I think that goes back to, again, human behavior. It goes back to understanding what generates memories. Much of, if you look back on your life, anyone, the things that they remember are those highlights are typically some profound experience. The things that have been the most difficult and the most exhilarating parts of your life fundamentally come back to the experience that you had in a particular point in time. And so, experience is just one way to heighten that relationship that you're looking to build with people, and to ensure that you're fundamentally creating value. The only way that you're sure that you're creating value is that other people consider what you've done valuable. And I think that's a part, not just economically valuable, but it can be valuable and fulfilling in many different ways. But that has to be the root of your decision making process.
Well, absolutely well said. And at the end of the day, once we create the value is all about the business that exists and everything that revolves around it. In fact, while talking about experiences, you created the first Apple store at New York. And for the retail business, you mentioned retail is not dead when compared to the e commerce business, of course. But bad retail is dead for sure. Can you elaborate on what do you mean by this?
Well, the work in retail, we've obviously spent many years. I think it's our 23rd year working with Apple, but the work in retail has always been one of the most competitive design environments out there, in the sense that if you're not refreshing what you're offering every 5 years, you're probably behind the curve. Now, what's happened with technology as well as acceleration from COVID has been this I would say compression between channels. They used to think of physical retail and virtual retail, anything that's e-commerce or digital, as as separate channels. The reality is today, there's probably not one person sitting in a space that doesn't have a mobile device in their pocket or adjacent to them. So we're simultaneously connected today. There's a kind of retail singularity that's happened because we tend to work with whatever touch point to that company uh, offers that fulfills the needs I have. So I may be ordering something online. I may be going to a space to see and touch and feel, and I may visit it and then come back and order after the visit. So this continuous cycle of relating the touch points that you have to people and having it fit into a broader relationship idea as opposed to focus purely on a transaction is where we've seen the most traction, where we've seen the most economic success. When we started with Apple, they were a $2 billion company. Now they're a $2 trillion company. But besides Apple, we can point to many cases that we've worked with in other sectors, from automotive to finance, insurance, all kinds of different design sectors, even government, and point to successful outcomes as a result of this approach.
Hey, did you know? In the International Design Award 2021, 8 Inc. won a bronze award in the architecture category for their work on the Weltmeister Experience Center. Wow, absolutely well said. In fact, while we continue to talk about the human experience design, can you share with us the most valuable component of human experience design and a company that you think has achieved success in creating the same for its customers?
Well, I think it goes back to not having kind of siloed thinking. Again, if we think of experience realms, well, let's start at the very center. If you're talking about people, you want to connect with people. If you're a company or you're selling something or you're looking to provide a service, the values that you have and the values that the people you want to connect with have, there has to be some shared sense of values that the things that you believe Apple or Virgin or Tesla stand for. If they share your values, you have a natural opportunity for a successful relationship. And the only way that relationship can really thrive is if you think about it as a holistic experience, that the environments, whether that's the architecture or the interior design, the products and services, the behavior of the staff, the forms of communications, all of those four experience realms to us are at the root of the types of things that have to be considered in order to deliver a holistic experience. And I think companies that do that well, aside from Apple, obviously, I think Nike does a great job at that. A small brand from Australia called Aesop, which is a health and beauty products kind of manufacturer. They all of these companies who have this point of view of connecting that end up with better performance in terms of that strong relationship, and that strong relationship ends up with, rather than focus on one transaction, you focus on a relationship, and you end up with many transactions. So your business outcomes are reinforced by delivering on the human outcomes.
Wow, interesting. And what is exciting, Mr. Kobe, here is to see the fact that we are talking about, even smaller companies actually applying some of these principles at their work. And it's not just restricted to large companies with large design departments, but even smaller companies using some of these tools. So I think that's very exciting.
No, it's not limited to large companies. A lot of people think that maybe they can't compete with the large companies, but I think it has to do with framing that relationship properly, and being able to define why you should exist, and why people should care. And if you're able to communicate that, if it's something that people need, you should have good success. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors that go into making successful business. But I do think that if you look at it from a strategic design perspective, that's really a great foundation, a great starting point. If you think of when Google started, the greatest innovation, the most customer centric thing that Google ever did was create a rectangle, and the idea that you could put anything that you're looking for into that rectangle and get an answer. It was adopted by so many people. It's the reason the company is where it is today. But it's been their most successful uh, business model economically, as well as the thing that's powered their growth. And I would just add that sort of insight, that kind of simplicity, sometimes seems so easy, but we have a tendency to overlook the simple things and add complications when in fact most people aren't looking for complexity. They're looking for something that just fulfills the need they have in the most effective way.
Interesting and well said. In fact, one of the other things, Mr. Kobe, that I also read in the description of your book was, can you elaborate on the concept of creative emotional intelligence?
Well, I think most companies maybe struggle with understanding the power of having a creative component to their business. Um, you know, I think it's probably one of the most powerful business tools that a company has, but many people struggle to actually um, know how to use creative services in an effective way. And a large part of the problem is that people who are creatively oriented struggle with linear thought processes. And I think that what we try to do is to uh, put together small, diverse teams. And by putting diverse teams together, it does a couple things. One is it moves away from this idea that there's this star architect or star designer, but there's ultimately a small group of people is much more powerful than a single person, and that what it tends to do is help mitigate some of the natural imbalance that comes from kind of singular pointed ideas. And as it as teams work together and develop, they tend to grow their emotional intelligence, and that means they start to understand one another and their point of view. Someone may come from an anthropology background, and somebody may be coming from design background, and another person from a business strategy background. But by working in small teams, they start to appreciate the points of view that others have, and ultimately, successful design is going to come from understanding something about the things that your target audience, whatever you want to call it, your customers, whatever they value. And in order to deliver those things, I think what we try to do is to keep smaller scale teams in many parts of the world. Probably, at least in Singapore, we serve so many countries out of the Singapore office that diversity is one of the key things in our group, because we need insights not only from gender and race and other things like that, but we also have to have the cultural diversity to serve a market that's as diverse as the ones that surround Singapore.
Absolutely. In fact, with the global borders actually diminishing, the internet actually connecting to the world, we're talking about a very connected world. And today, if there's something that happens in one country, we can feel the impact in the other one. And that's why being in terms of being inclusive, being very conscious about diversity in today's world is extremely important.
Hmm.
In fact, this brings me to one of my next questions, Mr. Kobe, is that most companies fail to identify customer value. What is your recommendation to hit the nail on its head and create products that actually address customers' needs?
Well, it's a bit what I mentioned a little bit earlier, which has to do with, companies need to understand why they exist, and fundamentally, you're either creating value or destroying value. That's essentially what most states of business exist within. And if you're extracting value from something that you've already created, that's fine, but you're ultimately slowly destroying value. So whether that's the 50th evolution of a particular product, those things tend to fundamentally have a limited life. If what you're looking at is creating value, then you're looking to define things that continually improve the human experience, improve the world around you, improve a simple interaction, whether that's sitting in a chair or flying a drone. I think you have to understand where value creation is occurring, and then be conscious of whether you're continuing to grow and expand that value, or if you're sort of taking it easy and living off of value you've already created, in which case you start extracting value. And I think most companies go through those types of cycles.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the other interesting parallels that I wanted to draw here, Mr. Kobe, is how we've evolved over a period of time on some of these important concepts. The conventional models spoke about customer satisfaction. Then we started talking about customer delight. And in fact, you have used the term called as passion. My question is, how are these different approaches? And can you share a successful example of customer passion?
Well, I think when we talk about passion, it comes from something that and I think it's probably one of the chapters in the book, but the idea of irrational loyalty. That when you have a successful relationship, you tend to be very loyal to that relationship because it's one that you value, and it's one that you care about. And I think that it has to come from a point of passion. It has to be something that you love. If it's something that you don't really care that much about, it's going to be very difficult to 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 elevate that relationship beyond a very kind of functional level. But when you start to serve kind of higher states of being, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy or any other hierarchy where you start to get more from that relationship, that's where the greatest connectivity can occur. And I think it's more than just putting them at the center, or are they satisfied with the experience. There's a lot of things satisfy you because it's what you expect. The things that you tend to really connect with are things that more than satisfy you, but give you something more than you expect, and provide some level of additional value that makes that relationship even more important. And that's where you have, if you design a successful outcome, the statistics are you have something like 6 times greater conversion in terms of sales or interactions. You have much greater advocacy or word of mouth. You even have 5 times more um, success in people forgiving you when you make a mistake. So you can go out as a company, and every company makes mistakes, but when they do, if you've created that strong relationship with them, they're more likely to forgive you for that mistake than to move on to another competitor. So all of these things ladder back to trying to drive towards passion and creating that irrational loyalty. That's where we see again the most success.
Interesting. And any one company that comes to top of your mind which follows the practice of customer passion?
Well, it comes from multiple touch points, and I think that there are ones that I consider that I'm passionate about. Um, but that might be different than the one that my neighbor believes is that they're passionate about. In fact, we do workshops with our clients where in the workshop we ask them to bring in an example of a brand that or a company that they care about and to tell us why. And we've done work with top fashion brands, top jewelry brands, and electronics. And what's interesting is the thread that runs through what makes people passionate about a particular product. And sometimes it depends on where their interests lie. And so having a deeper understanding, and this goes back to ultimately when you establish a relationship with a company, what you want to do is establish, as you do in any relationship, much more of a dialogue than a monologue. Many companies talk to people. What we're always looking to do is to have a conversation or a dialogue with people where information goes out and information comes in. And the most successful companies in the world, if you look at Google and Apple and Amazon, all of these companies, they have something that they benefit from something that Scott Galloway calls the new algorithm of value. And what that is they have more receptors from which they can derive information. And the more you posture that into a dialogue, the more there's an exchange of information, the better, more competitive you can be with your peers. And if you look at those companies who do have these receptors and intelligence, they get to provide a better product and a better experience with their customers as a result.
Hey, did you know 8 Inc. joins the list of the world's most visionary, influential retail and experience design on the announcement for the 2019 World Retail Awards finalists, shortlisted for outstanding store design for both Nissan Crossing and Globe Live. Interesting. And moving from this to another interesting dimension is how is the world of technology shaping your design approach? Does it turn it upside down? Does it seamlessly fit it as one of the components in the overall design? How's technology blending in with your design approach?
Well, we've always used technology, coming originally from Silicon Valley and working a lot, with technology companies. The progression of technology for us has been quite interesting. If you look at the Moore's law definition of the evolution of it, the fact that we're in a exponential kind of growth in technology makes it very fascinating, but it also makes it in some cases terrifying for people. And I think that the rate of change that people are experiencing today, particularly in technology, but in other areas, starts to implicate a challenge in adoption, a challenge in people becoming proponents of technology. There's certainly a degree of backlash to technology that exists, but from our point of view, technology is always something that we have to be curious about. We have to be looking at how it engages the things that we're doing. In retail, many people consider, e-commerce a huge disruption. In fact, we see it coming together in this kind of singularity where you just naturally have technology available to you all the time, and therefore it gives you opportunities to interact in new ways. And one of the things that we always hear is this idea that that there's this kind of polar condition between bricks and mortar and e-commerce, and that's only for people who are sort of millennial age and older. We're all a generation that had a pre-iPhone and a post-iPhone world. But if you look at young people today, particularly the generation that's coming up, having lived its entire life with technology, it's not that special. It's a bit like oxygen. They only care when they don't have it. And so the idea of technology and the perception of technology, particularly when we think of it as mobile devices and 5G and all of this, all of that is something that many young people today don't see as transformative because it's just been there their entire life. And so I think we also need to look at it from our own age and generation and recognize that our view of technology versus a view of somebody who's now 22 years old is going to be very, very different. And the most radical transformation that's happened in decades probably has already happened before they've come of age. So I think from that perspective, it's important to understand how technology fits within the way people live and the way people think and behave.
Absolutely. And while we, keep talking about technology, one of the other interesting element, Mr. Kobe, is talking about the world of artificial intelligence. In fact,
Mm.
while you propagate design for human experiences, they say that the next user you design for may not be human. The notion of design and innovation itself is changing, and the blended approach of technology and human elements with tools of artificial intelligence are changing the game. Will this actually lead to a completely different approach for designing?
Well, I think artificial intelligence is going to have an incredible impact, much more so probably than just the availability of a device that can process information that we have today. But Andrew Ng at Stanford talks about AI as sort of the next electricity. When we sort of discovered electricity and started to incorporate it, we had no idea of the possible uses that it could represent. And I think today AI is somewhat in a similar situation where we have this phenomenal capability. I think it's still underdeveloped, to a degree that it's fair to say it's in its infancy. It will change rapidly, but we also don't know quite how it's going to change. And I think that many of the uses of it have yet to be invented. And what I commonly hear about artificial intelligence is it's going to have this disruptive capability. It's going to replace everyone's job, and there's a lot of anxiety that can be generated by having it threaten people's livelihood and what have you. But I think that's somewhat of a distraction. Um, I think the real challenge here is to make sure that artificial intelligence doesn't end up in the hands of a few people, but that it ends up being as widespread as maybe mobile devices are today. And I think that you need to really be concerned about a few people having the control or the access with artificial intelligence, and many are concerned that intelligence itself will take over control. But I think we're at the infancy of this, and I do believe that it's important for us to start to put together a way of thinking about how to disseminate this capability into everyone's hands. If everyone were a programmer today, or if everyone had the access to all the information, such as we have on Google, it's going to transform a lot of people's lives. And I think that could be for the much be very much for the better. However, it's not without some risk, and I think we have to just be conscious and aware of the values that we're setting it up behind.
Absolutely. I think that's beautifully put across in terms of the impact of technology in terms of the real world, and let's see how it unfolds in due course of time. And while we spoke about technology, Mr. Kobe, shifting the gear to the world of education, you're a trustee of the Art Center College of Design. In your
Mhm.
opinion, what are the changes that education in the design should make and produce quality talent for today and tomorrow?
Well, one of the challenges of any educational structure is um, deciding what to teach. What will people need to know? And it's always been a somewhere between an art and a science, I would say. Doesn't matter whether it's a design school or Harvard or any other school. deciding what young people should know, and what are the things that are going to be the most valuable for them in the future, particularly at a time of extraordinary change. And I think there's a great book that Thomas Friedman wrote on. It's called "Thank You for Being Late," but he talks about, in 2007, all of the technologies and the companies that came to being around that time as being a very uh, transformative time. And if you think about it, um, the things that schools were teaching before that compared to what they would need to be teaching and thinking about after that, I think many schools and many trustees who are deciding what is the most important information to convey, it would have substantially changed, and many of them may not have been aware of it until many years later, maybe a decade later. So, defining a curriculum, part of it comes back to establishing, and particularly in the creative industries, establishing ways of thinking about solving problems, because there's never a shortage of problems with any new technology or any new evolution, progression in society. There are things that we could do a lot better, and so it's getting people to be able to have creative problem solving skills, to have have the appreciate the value of having a deeper understanding of one another. I think these are a lot of things that will actually help us be more, I would say, more enlightened than educated. And I think the idea that if you're going to create quality talent, for tomorrow, especially at a time that's so rapidly changing, you need to sort of ladder back to those core principles and ensure that everybody has those as baseline skills before you drill down into a deep vertical to study.
Well said. Absolutely well said, Mr. Kobe. In fact, at Avantika University, we coined a term called as designeering, which is the blended approach of design and engineering. Do you think these two domains, these two thoughts can converge on one page? And what do you think about this philosophy?
Well, I'm a big advocate of cross discipline work. One of the reasons we have multiple small teams on design projects, is because these different perspectives, particularly in expertise, whether it's in a particular category or not, we've always seen a much higher success rate with diverse teams than we have seen with siloed teams. And so the premise of design, what do you call it, designeering, that is um, to me, an essential part for any designer to appreciate and understand engineers, and engineers to understand and appreciate designers. And we have an exchange program with Art Center in Pasadena and INSEAD Business School, where we put designers to learn and to practice with people who are doing their MBA programs, so that we have a combination of business appreciating design and thought and process, as well as designers understanding business needs and outcomes. And so I think converging these things, particularly as you get into a latter stage in your career, where or in your education, where you can start to bring those skills to bear, and it teaches you to work in teams. I mean, we did a similar program with National University in Singapore here, and we required that each team was made up of people from three different disciplines rather than three from the same discipline. So I think it's a phenomenal approach that more schools need to look at and adopt.
Absolutely. Well said again. And though I would love this conversation to keep continuing, but it brings me to my last question, Mr. Kobe. But before that, to all our listeners, do read the new book by Mr. Tim Kobe and Roger Laban, Written on Experience, which is now available to purchase online and offline stores. Definitely do catch up on his experiences with particularly certain brands, on the kind of value that they're creating using the concept of experience for their customer. My last question to you, Mr. Kobe, is what is the most important key takeaway you want your readers to take home from this book and imbibe in their daily lives?
Wow, that's probably your toughest question of the day, I would say. I think the key takeaway here is maybe for people to recognize that design has a great opportunity to add value to many parts of your life, and that in terms of it being a takeaway is that as a way of thinking about problems, and one of the things that we look at is this notion of continual learning. We know that we're never done designing; it's always a sort of narrative, and to do your best at a given time doesn't mean that you can't pick it up and do it again and do it better. And so I think those are all things that are going to be positive attributes where design can really contribute to successful living uh, if you look at it from that perspective. So hopefully that's something that will have impact on the most people that we can.
Absolutely. And we couldn't have ended our show on a better note than this. Thank you so much, Mr. Kobe, for joining us on Avantika Designeering Podcast series. It was a pleasure talking to you and knowing your thoughts on the world of design, customer experience, and adding value to them. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you, Rohit. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Hey there, we hope you enjoyed our show. Do write to us on ads@avantika.edu.in. We look forward to your opinions, feedbacks, and suggestions of speakers you would like us to host on this show. Do tune in our channel next week on Wednesday for a new story on Hubhopper or wherever you get your podcast from. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.